Formula One's heaviest ever cars are getting heavier still next season, continuing an apparently unstoppable trend. While F1 is in a strong place in many ways, and the 2022 technical changes are part of a shifting landscape designed to make it even stronger, one area it's failed to address is the constant weight gain through the V6 turbo hybrid era. Next year, F1's minimum weight will rise to 790 kilograms, which means the hybrid era cars have had roughly the equivalent of a giant panda added to them since 2014, and the comparison's even more troubling when we look back just a few years further. While this isn't a popular phenomenon, if during this video you at least approve of our explanation of why this has happened and what it means for F1, you can hit the like button at any time to show your support of us. But let's get into how F1 cars got so heavy and why it's only getting worse. We'll kick things off with some basic numbers that will help highlight F1's weight gain since the end of refueling. In 2009, the final year of refueling, the minimum weight of an F1 car was still only 605 kilos. Now it's 752, and next year it'll be 790. That's already a huge change, but you also need to factor in the fuel. The lightest cars in 2009 would have been running around 40 kilos of fuel at the start, give or take a few kilos. Compare that to today when the cars have 110 kilos of fuel on board from the start, and the difference is even greater. Next year the cars are going to weigh around 900 kilos on the opening lap, so somewhere around 250 kilos heavier than the lightest cars at the start of a Grand Prix even as recently as 2009. So how's this happened? There are some big spikes over the last 12 years or so, but it's the introduction of hybrid technology that kicked off the current trend. The first kinetic energy recovery system didn't actually increase the minimum car weight in 2009, but it did in the next 2 years with a rise to 640 kilos in 2011, coinciding with every team adopting the hybrid tech after an agreement for nobody to use it in 2010. The next major step came in 2014 when F1 shifted to radically different rules for the car and especially the engine, introducing the V6 turbo hybrid. A massive 50 kilogram increase in minimum engine weight to facilitate the new hybrids was at the heart of that. Since then, significant rule changes have continued the trend. The cars were made bigger and faster in 2017, the Halo driver protection device was introduced in 2018, and in 2019 there was a new 80 kilo minimum weight for the driver, their race gear and their seat. Smaller safety initiatives and tweaks like another engine minimum weight rise for 2021 and bigger tyres have also contributed to the gradual transformation of F1 cars into bigger, heavier machinery. Next year, the addition of 18-inch wheels and some standardised components to save costs contribute to a hefty 38 kilogram increase overall. This looks ridiculous over a long period, but broken down into each instalment it actually becomes more understandable. Especially as things like common side impact structures, new crash test requirements and inventions like the Halo certainly can't be argued against because safety is paramount. F1 could create a beautifully light and quick car if it was a 1 litre turbocharged engine without hybrid components, and it would use less fuel than the current cars as well. But it wouldn't be hybrid, and that's a no-go. So this has been driven by F1's desire to remain relevant to automotive companies. Having a heavy, complex V6 turbo hybrid engine is clearly a key part of F1's weight rise. The cars will have gained almost 100 kilos in 8 years, yet even with all that extra weight, the hybrid era has ushered in F1's fastest ever cars. But it's not about the impact on lap time. Compared to the absolute peak of the mid-2000 cars, a popular representative of the V10 era, the longer, heavier cars we have now are lazier and they don't have the same sharpness. They're still very challenging to drive and very quick, but 15 to 20 years ago, F1 cars turned in so much more dynamically and dramatically. Watching a normally aspirated car from the V10 era, or even the V8s, the speed of direction change was extraordinary. It's not the same now. The movement of the car shows how much extra bulk it's carrying. Even though these are quicker cars over a lap, they're just not as agile in slow corners. That trait doesn't lend itself well to wheel-to-wheel combat. Regardless of the aero, there's more mass to change direction with, and brake, and do all these dynamic things with, and that's a big factor. The big negative implication of all the weight is the effect on the tyres. F1's at the outer limit of what tyre technology can withstand with the torquiest, heaviest cars ever built. Pirelli is struggling and therefore building tougher and tougher tyres, which are more and more difficult to race. Aesthetically, the cars don't look as good in motion, but the tyres suffer the most, and this breeds knock-on consequences as the load gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we end up with drivers who can't push when they're behind other cars because one small slide at the rear and the tyre temperatures spike. Then that's it. It's difficult to get the temperatures back under control, it snowballs, and the stint is compromised. Marry that to long, wide, heavy cars, and the quality of racing can only suffer. The concern is there seems no obvious point at which F1 can come back from this and start taking the weight out again. If F1 remains wedded to this hybrid engine formula, no part of the car offers an opportunity to identify an easy 50 kilos to lop off. As we mentioned earlier, the minimum weight of the power unit in the hybrid era was initially set at 145 kilos in 2014. But that's risen by 5 kilos in 2021 for cost-saving reasons to stop manufacturers spending silly money on special materials in the name of trimming off a few hundred grams here and there. And for the next generation engine in 2025, F1 and the FIA are talking about implementing a cost cap on how much can be spent on the development. That'll make keeping the weight down an issue and shows there's lots of competing agendas within what F1 wants to achieve with its new engine. Similarly, safety is another area that will not be compromised. It's the common driver of smaller weight gains, which is partly why the minimum weight for 2022 has been raised a second time. Most of the time, safety equipment is boring, uninteresting and heavy. But the point where you really want it is when people start hitting things, and suddenly F1's very grateful for all that heft. It's effectively insurance paying off. This situation will not change without a completely radical rethink of what an F1 car rule set is. Next year's rules overhaul clearly hasn't done that because the cars are still getting heavier. That's not a target of the rule makers, it simply emerges out of other objectives. So F1 seems stuck with cars that are big and heavy, too heavy for the tyres, and that will inevitably compromise the quality of the racing. There may be ways to lessen the consequences, and 2022 may prove to mark progress in F1's quest to achieve that. But it also underlines the likelihood that the idea of F1 as a category for lightweight, super sharp single-seaters is confined to the past. Does the ever-increasing weight of F1 cars bother you, or is it something we just need to accept as an unavoidable trait of modern-day Grand Prix racing? Make sure you have your say in the comments, give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already to come back for more.